Of all the games I've played in my life, Knights of the Old Republic is one of the most important. It introduced me to the world of RPGs and gave me a Star Wars story unlike anything I'd experienced before. It broadened my understanding of what a video game could be and gave me a standard to compare future games to. More than that though, it blew open the doors on the Star Wars universe, forcing me to rethink what Star Wars actually was. To say that this game is one of the most influential pieces of media I've ever consumed might be an understatement. For many people, this sentiment may be familiar. After all, I'm not the only person that holds KOTOR in such high regard. This game can be found on many people's list of favorite games, and it regularly comes up in discussions about the greatest video games of all time. KOTOR's impact as a video game is undeniable, but what exactly is it that makes this game so special? History is filled with plenty of fantastic RPGs and more than enough Star Wars games. What about Knights of the Old Republic makes it stand out among this sea of competition? Why is it so loved and revered by so many people, even 17 years after releasing? The answer is actually quite simple. Its story. KOTOR has, in my opinion, one of the best stories ever told in a video game. But this isn't special just because it has a good story. It's the way in which that story is told and the implications the narrative has for the greater Star Wars universe that makes Knights of the Old Republic such an important game. It took what people loved about Star Wars and put it in an era that was entirely independent of Lucas's 6 movies. It also gave players options in how they navigated the story and accomplished different objectives. Your actions had direct consequences on the world around you, affecting the conversations you had with other characters and influencing how certain events played out. While KOTOR's other features were good in their own right, it was the game's storytelling that gave it its reputation. Now, in order to truly understand and appreciate KOTOR's impact on both video games and Star Wars, we need to take a look back on how this game came to be in the first place. While KOTOR may have been many people's first introduction to the Old Republic era, it was not actually the first piece of media to cover this time period. Back in the 90s, a series of comic books were released called Tales of the Jedi that introduced this period in galactic history. The first few story arcs covered the adventures of 2 Jedi, Nomi Sunrider and Ulic Qel-Droma, as well as the fall to the dark side of both Qel-Droma and another Jedi named Exar Kun. Their fall and eventual joining of forces leads to the Great Sith War, in which they lead an assault on both the Jedi and the Republic. After Qel-Droma kills his own brother in one of the battles, he realizes the gravity of what he's done, leading him to abandon the dark side and betray Exar Kun. All of these events take place approximately 4,000 years before the rise of Darth Vader. 2 of the later story arcs cover a different series of events that take place about 5,000 years before the movies. These arcs tell the story of the downfall of the original Sith Empire and introduce several ancient Sith Lords, including Marco Ragnos, Naga Sadow, and Ludo Kresh. These were some of the most powerful Sith Lords back when the Sith Empire was at the peak of its power, and they have gone on to be referenced in many other pieces of Star Wars media, including Knights of the Old Republic. The comics detail Naga Sadow's rise to power and his assault on the Republic in what became known as the Great Hyperspace War. The Republic and Jedi were eventually victorious, leading to Naga Sadow's exile and the ultimate destruction of the Sith Empire, or at least what everyone thought was its ultimate destruction. The MMO Star Wars The Old Republic expands on these events and how they led to the return of the Sith Empire over 1,000 years later, but that's a topic for another video. The point is, Tales of the Jedi laid the foundation for what would become Knights of the Old Republic. Now, there's an interesting tidbit about the development of this game. In an interview back in 2002, the CEO of BioWare mentioned that when LucasArts first came to them to make a Star Wars RPG, they gave BioWare a choice. They could make a tie-in game for Attack of the Clones, or they could make a game set thousands of years before the movies. BioWare ended up choosing the latter option because it gave them more creative freedom to write their own Star Wars narrative. Aside from Tales of the Jedi, nothing had really been explored in this era of the Star Wars universe. The result, of course, was Knights of the Old Republic. The game basically used the events from Tales of the Jedi as background for the world it was building. While none of the characters or events make an appearance, there are numerous references to them found throughout the game. For example, at one point during your adventure, you travel to Korriban, the ancient homeworld of the Sith. As part of the story there, you need to explore the tombs of both Marco Ragnos and Naga Sadow. Since KOTOR takes place approximately 4,000 years before the movies, these Sith Lords have been dead for a very long time. Setting the game during that specific time period meant the story events had to happen somewhat close to the Great Sith War I mentioned earlier. In fact, you discover at some point in the game that the war with Exar Kun took place about 40 years before the events of the game. As a result, these events have a bigger impact on KOTOR's story than the ancient Sith Lords, even if they are only referenced. While Tales of the Jedi helped provide some of the lore and background for the Old Republic era, KOTOR established its own unique story and lore. The Mandalorian Wars, Revan and Malak, the Rakata, the Starforge, all of these things were entirely new to the world of Star Wars. Wars, further expanding the universe of a galaxy far, far away. By taking inspiration from both Tales of the Jedi and Lucas's films, BioWare was able to create their own unique story that felt entirely Star Wars, even if it took place thousands of years before Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. As a kid, this game's story changed my perspective of Star Wars. I was only 9 when KOTOR came out in 2003, but that doesn't mean I wasn't already obsessed with this universe. It was and still is one of my favorite things in the world, and I tried consuming as much as I possibly could. Books, games, TV shows, rewatching the movies, anything I could do to get more Star Wars. When I played through KOTOR, it was the first time I was introduced to the Old Republic era. Everything I had consumed up to that point had to do with either the prequels or the original trilogy. Every book and every game had to do with the characters and events of the movies. That wasn't a bad thing, it just gave me the perception that Star Wars was only about Anakin and Obi-Wan, about Luke, Han, and Leia. Everything Star Wars had to deal with these characters in some way. What KOTOR showed me was that Star Wars was more than just the tragedy of Darth Vader. The movies tell a very specific story, a fantastic story, but a very specific story. KOTOR demonstrated that there were more things in the galaxy to explore, more people, places, and events that had nothing to do with the movies. For the first time, I saw Star Wars as this massive canvas with infinite possibilities to explore. I wasn't confined to only the couple of decades that the movies cover. There was a whole universe to learn about, an expanded universe, if you will. KOTOR may not have started the official expanded universe, but I think it impacted it more than anything else, especially because of how successful it was as a game. While Tales of the Jedi was the one to introduce the Old Republic era, KOTOR is what made it popular. It became one of the best-selling games on the original Xbox and has gone on to sell millions of copies. It paved the way for several books and 2 game sequels, which have all further expanded the Old Republic era. Its enduring legacy as one of the best video games of all time helps it be remembered and attract new players even 17 years later. People have been clamoring for remasters of this game, as well as movies and TV shows depicting these stories. It has become one of the most popular Star Wars narratives, and that's why it was so much more impactful on the Star Wars universe than Tales of the Jedi. Its impact on Star Wars is a huge part of why this game is so special, but it's not the only reason. Remember, KOTOR isn't just considered one of the greatest Star Wars video games of all time, it's considered one of the greatest video games of all time. Its impact as an RPG is also what makes KOTOR so special. Having that Star Wars label definitely helped shine a spotlight on the game back in 2003, but it still needed to back up those expectations and live up to the hype. One of the things that has always stood out to me about Knights of the Old Republic is the amount of choice you were given as a player. From the moment you start up a new game, you are given the freedom to customize your gameplay experience. Do you want to be a soldier who gets up close and personal with his enemies? Maybe a scoundrel that gets by on his skill and charisma. Both are completely possible to create at the start and develop over the course of the game. When you wake up on the Endar Spire, you are quickly given the choice to use a variety of different weapons, from blaster rifles to pistols to melee weapons. You can choose to dual wield or single wield, and you can approach each enemy encounter a different way each time by pausing the game and strategizing. You were never pigeonholed into making a specific type of character, even later on when you learned to use the Force and acquired your lightsaber. You didn't need to use these items to succeed if you didn't want to, though they were certainly helpful. I know these may just sound like typical RPG tropes, and they are, but it's important to point out that not every RPG lets you customize your gameplay experience to this extent. The choices that really stand out the most for me though, and I think for many other people as well, are the narrative choices. I'm always impressed by the amount of influence you have on this game's story, and how many quests were designed with multiple solutions in mind. While the main story beat of hunting down the star maps, finding the Starforge, and killing Darth Malak is always the same, there are many different ways to achieve this, different ways of completing the same objectives. Let me give you an example. During your search for Bastila on Taris, you learn that some of the escape pods from the Endar Spire landed on the lower levels of the city. When you find the entrance to the lower levels, you are stopped by a Sith soldier who prevents you from proceeding, telling you that you don't look like a Sith patrol and you don't have the proper authorization papers. The game updates to tell you that you'll need to either find these papers or find some way to fool the guard in order to pass. You aren't given any waypoints and you aren't told where to find these items. Instead, you're required to explore the map, talk to the characters, and see if you can find them on your own. As it turns out, there are actually 2 possible solutions, and you can come across either one of them during your investigation. One comes about from doing some basic exploring, and the other one can be found by talking to NPCs in the local cantina. Both will get you past the guard, but the game lets you come across these solutions in your own way without holding your hand and pointing you exactly where you need to go. This demonstrates the freedom you were given as a player to achieve your objectives. Many quests will tell you to complete an objective, but won't tell you how to complete it. You're essentially told to explore the game on your own to discover possible solutions and then given the freedom to pick whichever solutions you prefer. I'm also always impressed with the intricacies of conversations and how important your interactions are for the overall narrative. In almost every conversation you have, you're given a wide range of dialogue options to choose from that can sometimes result in very different outcomes. And these aren't just 1 or 2 word answers, these are entire sentences of dialogue where you know exactly what you're going to be saying. Not only that, conversation sometimes becomes a game in and of itself, where you need to tailor your responses to get the information you need or get a character to respond in a particular way. A great example of this is the last trial in your Jedi training. This trial involves cleansing the taint of the dark side from the grove on Dantooine. When you get to the grove, you discover a fallen Jedi named Juhani who attacks you immediately. After defeating her in battle, you engage in a conversation with her to tell her why you're there and learn why she fell to the dark side. She tells you how she killed her master in anger during training and fled from the Jedi Enclave. You can see that she is remorseful about her actions and thinks death is the best thing for her. Here is one of the many instances where conversation can affect the outcome of entire storylines. You can decide to cleanse the taint of the dark side by killing Juhani, or you can try and bring her back to the light. If you decide to kill her, she and any quest related to her will be unavailable for the rest of the game. If instead you try to redeem her, she will become a helpful companion moving forward. When you try to redeem Juhani, you need to be careful when choosing what to say to her. Choosing the wrong dialogue option can result in a failure to convert her, ending the conversation and forcing you to start all over again. The game wants you to think carefully about how characters will respond to what you say, forcing you to read through all the dialogue options instead of just recklessly choosing the first thing you like. Many of your decisions will have a significant impact on the outcome of events in the game. This gives conversations more nuance and makes them more important than simply talking to someone to advance the story. The point is, Knights of the Old Republic doesn't just have a great story. It has an excellent way of presenting that story and giving the player the freedom to create their own character and make their own decisions and solutions. That, combined with KOTOR's massive impact on the Star Wars universe, is what makes this game so special.